Good morning, everybody. How's your week going? Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. So welcome, folks. I'd like to call to order the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee for Thursday, January 12th, 2023. It's 11:02 a.m. and we're meeting virtually this morning. I see we're still short a quorum. We'll go ahead and roll into the update on the Justice Project. We've come a long way, as you know, since the January of last year, or this year, last year, I guess it would be, right? 2022. And we're right at the end now. We've done a lot of outreach to the community, had a town hall forum. We did some special outreach to the tribal communities and immigrant communities and to those folks that were formerly incarcerated and their families. Right now, we're at the point where the final report is being put together for presentation to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, actually next week. And it will come before the task force as well. So that's one thing that we're going to be talking about today, is what a draft motion might look like for the task force to consider at that meeting. That's on the 23rd, sorry. Anyway, you've probably all gotten notices to complete a survey in the last couple weeks. Jill, when does that survey close?
The 11th.
Okay, so it's already closed yesterday then.
Yes, that's correct.
So those of you that filled it out, thank you. We appreciate the participation. We've one of our means of collecting information was to hit the task force with the survey as well. So I guess we could talk about what a motion might look like. It can be very simple. I guess we're trying to figure out the phrasing and the wording, whether we support the initiative, whether we approve the initiative. So we just kind of want to get that language dialed in a little bit today, so we kind of know where we're going. And what the commitment from the task force would be. Any thoughts? Arlene, you're muted.
Are you asking us to craft the tightest summarizing type of presentation? Is that what you're looking for?
Not really. What we're looking for is how does the task force want to endorse the needs assessment? Do we want to say they support it? Do we want to say they approve it? Just kind of that, what's the level of commitment the task force wants to make to the report, I think is what we're looking for.
I mean, just off the top of my head, without having really thought about this before, it just seems to me that we're the ones who've been working on this from the beginning and nurturing it and collecting responses and so forth. So it would seem that our commitment should be pretty strong to what we're proposing.
So you would suggest go all the way to the point of approve rather than just support, or?
Well, I'd like to hear what other people think, but it doesn't, I mean, why would we be doing this if we weren't really in the approval stance?
Other thoughts?
Well, I think we need to remember that a lot of people who don't have the background of the task force are on the SAC also and had a hand in shaping those recommendations. So it's not at all inconceivable, and it's probably likely that at least some of the recommendations differ a little bit from the task force perspective because they bring in other viewpoints. I think the SAC planning team, which was Jack, Barry, and me, thought we should frame the initial motion to approve it, but realize both for that diversity of opinion and for the fact that it appears not everybody on the task force reads everything in detail that's put before them, including 50-page documents, that may turn out to be a little bit of a steep hill to climb, and that we could fall back to endorsing it or supporting it, or because certainly the task force should, and I think does, recognize the amount of work people have put into those recommendations, that they're only recommendations to the county council, and they're worth having the council consider in a positive light. So I think endorsing is a level of support that probably ought to gain pretty wide acceptance among task force members.
Considering what you just said, do you think it would be helpful to have maybe one sentence about the diversity of input to just acknowledge it, do you think?
I wouldn't put that in the motion.
Okay.
I would put that in the discussion or
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think, go ahead, Barry.
I think we could frame it up just kind of like what we did today. Just talk about the public outreach component, especially that I think you're interested in, the diversity of that outreach. Yeah, we can just include that in how we frame up the discussion before we even ask for a motion. So I like the word endorse. I like that. What's other folks think? I see heads nod.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, let's just call it that we will use the word endorse, and the planning team will work on that, get that motion nailed down. It should be very simple.
Raylene and Caleb, you're sort of committee chairs here. Do you have any comments you want to make?
I was waiting for Aline.
I guess I think endorse would probably endorse, support, I think are similar, but I'll let Caleb go.
I'm conflicted on it because I agree with Steve, and I think that we've had, or maybe, I'm sorry, it was Arlene who was saying that we had, sort of foundational influence over the direction of all this. And so there's half of me that says that we've got to be careful about what that looks like in application when we go out and endorse really what is amounting to, by extension, a lot of our own work. But at the same time, I feel like supporting our own work is also a good thing, and that our endorsement or our approval or whatever, however we word it, will mean something to the folks who aren't reading the entire packet, who aren't reading the full 50-page report. So I'm okay with the word endorse, but I'm kind of two minds up on it.
Other thoughts? Maya, you got any thoughts on it?
No, thanks.
Barry?
The other word that came up for me, Barry, and I like endorse, honestly, is to adopt. And I'm only thinking about that in the sense that I know that there will be, well, from what we've already talked about, that it involves obviously a number of different members, a number of different perspectives, and that sort of thing. And so anyway, the thought about possibly somewhere in there, whether it be the discussion or the formal motion, the word adopting.
So we got, what would we be adopting it to? That's where I get hung up on, that is that we would be adopting it in as some sort of a doctrine into our work, which may be true.
That's what I was thinking. I mean, in terms of, okay, here we are, there may be more information, there may be, adjustments, depending, but okay, we're seeing this as a current snapshot of all the work that's been done, to move forward with. That was what I was thinking about, that more action word, not excluding, but taking it on, accepting it as, where it is at this point, that kind of thought process. Sorry about my background noise.
Any thoughts about the word adopt?
What about declaring support of?
It's too many words, I think.
I prefer endorse. I know it comes down to semantics,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to understand what it would look like to adopt. I mean,
That's
again,
what I'm having trouble with too.
it sounds like we're, essentially incorporating this body of work into our foundational doctrine, which I'm not sure that's taking place here. So I think endorse is the appropriate wording.
Okay, going once, going twice with endorse. Everybody good? All right, let's move on. Pyramid Communications, that's scheduled to be me, but I don't have a whole lot to say about it, other than we did a lot of work that we formulated together with Pyramid, and one of those was the Ann Deacon Center for Hope renaming ceremony that we did last week. And that was just a very great event. It was very well attended, over 50 people. We got an immediate, King 5 was there. They did some interviews, and they filmed, this ceremony, and they did a wonderful piece that very same night on the news. So we got good media coverage. And I guess, Stephen, you said, who picked it up locally? The Current?
The Salish Current had an article before that, and I think Cascadia Daily News had an article maybe same day also.
Okay, so that strategy that Pyramid Communications kind of hoped would transpire did. We got good media attention. We got some good attendance at the event itself, and it was cold, but that's okay. But that's part of it, and I'll let Jill, talk about the going forward part. We've now we've done a Facebook page. We started getting into that world. So Jill.
Yeah, we're still building the Facebook page for the task force. We're almost there. I've redone most of the web pages at Pyramid's recommendations. So there's some reorg and new content in the task force web pages. I think the question now is whether or not the steering committee or the task force needs to have some kind of formal approval of the core messages. If you recall, the original contract with Pyramid asked them to identify 3 to 4 core messages that it would build a communications campaign strategy around. So I emailed all of you, 45 minutes ago, what the messages that Pyramid have developed so far. And so we were wondering, does the steering committee need to formally approve these messages? Do you think the full task force needs it? Emily and Sakar are really looking for some formal acknowledgement of the communications plan before they move forward anymore. So that's the question.
Jill, did they lay out any timeline where they would like a response by?
They did not. We did extend the contract to the end of March, so that's our time frame. But there's still quite a bit of work to do for them. So I think probably, of course, sooner the better. If we need to hold it over to the full task force in January, we can definitely do that.
What are thoughts? Raylene, I saw a nod of approval. What were you thinking? Were you thinking task force level?
I think the task force needs to review this and weigh in on it.
I would want approval from every entity.
Maya?
This is the first time, this is my first time ever attending this particular meeting. And I had never seen, or I had never looked at the core messages before. I don't know if I'd been ever seen them as my participation.
No, we're seeing it for the first time this morning.
Okay. I guess having read through it briefly, I was a little, I mean, I think that the mission of preventing incarceration, at least part of that really has to articulate support for adequate and funding for both the public defender and the prosecutor's office, because we have to have adequate, we really have to have a lot of support to move cases at the pace that's being suggested and desired. So it's not noted anywhere in here. And I think that that's a gap.
I believe I read that those ideas in one of the other lists of goals and values, but I can't name it because my head is brimming with all these messages and so forth. But I do remember reading about support for staffing of prosecutor's office in various ways. So it's listed somewhere. The question is where.
And Maya, I agree with you. In fact, I just got off a meeting before I came to this one where one of the concerns were we were looking at kind of the county's accomplishments on the Bureau recommendations. And one of the things that came up was that we don't have unanimity around all the different entities involved, like the courts, the prosecutor's office, the task force. We don't have that unanimity, sorry, can't say that word, in thought. And we're kind of moving at different paces, it feels to me. So I think it's important that we do message that somehow to be able to bring that to the forefront, that we need to have, more coordination, how we move forward between the sheriff's office, the prosecutor's office, your office, and how we fund it and how we make that a priority. So maybe we could, I don't know how we interweave that into our communications plan. Stephen?
Yeah, I want to back up a little bit here. The impetus for this came from the task force, so I completely agree that the task force ought to approve the messages. But the purpose of it was to communicate the work that the task force has done, the centrality of the work that the task force has done, and its role moving forward. It was not a programmatic piece. It was a messaging piece. We brought in PR professionals to speak at a level that the general citizenry could grasp. And so I would disagree that we need to be as specific as Maya is suggesting. We particularly targeted the messages, or the steering committee group that's worked with Pyramid has particularly understood their emphasis on working at that level to begin with, to get out some positivity about the task force. And in my view, those messages are close enough. The other thing we asked in the contract was for them to give us a template of how to go about those two-way communications with community members in the future. And so I think as we get to more specific kinds of measures that we could take, increasing funding for the public defender's office and other things, I think we now have a way to do that. Jill's done a lot of in-house work so that we have some tools to do that in. And I would strongly support going forward, having that kind of message be part of what we engage the community in talking about. But I would not come out of the gate with that level of messaging.
Caleb?
I want to allow Maya to respond if she had something to respond for.
I did have a response. Thanks for letting me do that. I think it's foundational, Stephen. I don't think we cannot name the basic agencies who are really dealing with moving these cases through the process and consider that appropriate communication. I think they have to be named. That's my strong opinion.
Caleb?
So as I'm looking at just the core messages, and again, this is the first time any of us have had a chance to really look them over. And I, was driving over to the work center, as I got the email. So I've not had a lot of time to look at it. But as I look at these, I have two concerns. Number one, we're using some statistics that are somewhat static, but using them in a dynamic way as though things haven't changed since 2021. That's concerning for me, not because, that's not an accurate statement. Say number 15, lead members, jail bookings dropped by 97%. Well, that is an accurate statement for 2021, but what has happened since then? We have more information, and I would want to make sure that we're being responsible with the information we're putting out there. Number two, I don't see a large component of what's affecting our criminal justice system mentioned in any of these core messages, which is concerning for me, and that's behavioral health. And it may be there, but it's not specifically called out. I think that everybody in this room knows that one of the major problems that we have, and it's become more of an issue over the last, say, 6 months, is the issue of competency and or restoration. And I don't see that message in here. And it could be that I'm just not reading it, and it's right here glaringly obvious in my face, but I don't see it. And I think that's a huge misstep to not have that as part of the messaging. And I don't have any influence of these, writings or what was written up for these recommendations, but I think that that's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Raylene?
Caleb pretty much took everything out of my mouth. So thank you, Caleb, for making those points. I was thinking that as I was reading some of these percentages, I'm like, well, was it really lead that made these numbers drop by 97%? And then on Maya's comment before, and some of the stuff that came out from that it's not just funding for the defense, public defense, and the prosecutor's office. It's having the mental health staffing available to assist in making sure people are evaluated promptly and restored, as Caleb was talking about the competency and restoration, and that has to be some of our core statements, because without having that available, it's a detriment to both the prosecutor's office, the court, the jail. I mean, it's everything. And as Maya said before, it's a foundational issue.
Maya?
Thanks. So Caleb, I think like number 3 of the messages does make sort of past reference to mental health issues leading to incarceration, but I think you're right in identifying that sort of the sustained incarceration is existing because of a lack of services within the system. Like it leads to them, but then once they're in the system, we're totally failing them, not providing any services in the jail, and the state isn't providing restoration. So that's making it 1,000 times worse, and that's where we can try to address outside the system, but when they're clearly in the system, the responsibility is ours, right? So I think that I agree that should be called out.
Thank you. I should thank you so much for emphasizing this issue, because the whole set of changes that we're talking about have to do with filling the gaps in our social service system in our county and in the Northwest. So it is absolutely vital. I don't even know how that slipped away. but because, I mean, the only reason that I would go forward for supporting a jail is that the separate and equally important piece is the mental health addiction treatment piece, which is so lacking. So I'm not sure how to say it in our statements, but I appreciate so much that you're reminding us what we're here for.
Caleb,
Yeah, and I also want to say that what Maya points out in terms of support needed for the defender's office doesn't stop with funding like Raylene said. It comes to behavioral health specialists who are integrating with people who are in custody or formerly in custody and working through their cases. It's the prosecutor's office, it's courts not having enough staff. There's a tremendous amount of things that happen that aren't super obvious when you start pulling on that particular thread, and you can't strengthen one arm of the criminal justice system without commiserately strengthening the rest of the system. And again, this has to be mentioned, and I'm going to say it again because we've all talked about it, and I just said it again, but the behavioral health component is one of the largest drivers for jail population right now. There are people who need to be in custody because they're unsafe, and those people need to be evaluated because of competency issues, and the competency issues are not being dealt with in any sort of timely manner. We're talking years to, lots and lots of months before people are getting addressed, and that is a major issue that needs to be like shining lights, flashing lights on this whole issue. It doesn't jump off the page for me here.
Stephen?
I'll just say again, this comes out of 2020 when we had people on the streets over the George Floyd murder or over the clearing Camp 210. And all of the interviews with those people said, you shouldn't have law enforcement responding to mental health needs. You should have diversion programs. You should have X, Y, and Z. Most of that the task force had done. We had GRACE, we had LEAD, we built a crisis stabilization center. The community just didn't know about the work that the task force had done for years. And so the impetus for this contract and the whole emphasis on community communication was to tout what the task force had done and was doing. It was not to lay out a future plan. It was not to mix this with the SAC planning and the new jail and the network of services we want to build. We know that. I don't disagree with anything that Maya or Raylene or Caleb or Arlene have said, but that is prospective. We're trying to, with this contract, we were trying to have the community appreciate the value that the task force has already committed, to know about the task force at all in the first place, and to understand the base that we've laid that we'll move forward from. So to me, that's what that messaging does. It doesn't tell us everything that's foundational for moving ahead in the future or making further improvements, but it does let them know that we've been out there in the trenches since 2015 doing important stuff. And I haven't looked at this iteration of the messaging, but that's what we asked Pyramid to do, and I think they've done a fairly decent job of doing that.
Jill?
Thanks, Barry. I just wanted to put one thing on the record that I think you're all looking at the list. If you go beyond the list of the next several pages, Emily and Sakar have brought this to the task force twice last fall. So this isn't new information. It sounds like everyone seems to agree that task force does need to approve the core messaging, which is totally fine. I don't know. I guess I need some direction from the steering committee here on, do you want to have Emily and Sakara significantly rework these messages? Do you want them to come to the January task force meeting if they can and talk about how they develop these messages?
Raylene,
Thank you. I think my point at the very beginning was that I think the task force has to weigh in on what these core messages are, whether it needs to be reworked or not. Maybe if they just attend and listen in to see if there's anything that they think they should change after the task force weighs in on this. I think the work that we have done since 2015 is phenomenal. And I'm happy that we are trying to move forward. My concern is that we don't want our core messages to be misrepresented by some of the other events that have happened, which is why I think it's important to have the task force as a whole weigh in on anything that we're endorsing or moving forward on as a whole. Thank you.
Maya?
I disagree, Stephen, because in the documents following this list, it does under the title narrative structure, it says the following narrative structure will introduce audiences to the IPRTF, contextualizing and illuminating its work from founding. Okay, that's the historic perspective to current focus based on a continually evolving landscape. I don't know that there needs to be like a whole reworking, but there are gaps, there are things missing. That's what I see.
Caleb?
Yeah, picking up from there, I agree completely, Stephen, that looking at the body of work, that historical work that the task force has done is appropriate. And I don't see that there's glaringly an issue with those core items being mentioned, but I did look further down on the sheet before I spoke. And my only point is that most recent work has been focusing on the most recent issues. So in the last, say, year to maybe even 6 months, we've been fairly focused on this issue of competency and restoration, to the point where we've got work that Barry's headed up to try and figure out if there are legislative efforts can reform or help with this effort. And so I'm just saying that there's been recent work that could be incorporated into the messaging that is very important and certainly vital to this conversation that I think is being left out if we don't highlight it specifically. I'm not taking away from anything that's already written, because I think that's all valuable stuff, but I just want to make sure that that latent or the most recent piece here is included.
Chief Tank?
Yeah, so I do apologize for arriving late to the meeting, but two things from what I'm hearing is that, one, we've already asked for an extension. I think I heard that earlier. And two, as I look at the report, it's 20 pages. And my concern is if it's going to be reworked a bit or tweaked a bit, that we really should be cognizant of the length of the report, because the longer the report, the less it's going to be read. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
So Jill, is that correct to characterize this as a report? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think these are just messages that the pyramid will then craft into and I don't know yet, however they plan on communicating with the community. I think they're going to do some focus testing on some of these messages. So it's not going to be a straight up and down report like this.
No, it's going to be parsed out into if it's maybe a social media post or something, it would be, you wouldn't post the whole report.
And the very last page where it says current state and focus today, I think some of the things that Maya and Caleb are talking about can certainly, I would imagine, be incorporated into this section here. The current work of the task force is in that section right there.
Caleb?
Sorry to monopolize all the time. Yeah, I saw that as well, Jill. One of the things that I've been looking through each of our messages and trying to be cognizant of as we worked with Dr. Alexis Harris in the past, some of the phrasing is important to make sure that we're being respectful of the language here. I see in that sort of last paragraph, reducing racial disparities, but we use the word disparity and disproportionality almost interchangeably in these documents, and they're different things. And I want to make sure that we're talking about disparities when we mean disparities, and we're talking about disproportionalities when we mean disproportionalities. And if both are required, then we need to say that specifically. Some of the messaging that we looked at in the recent survey had that same issue, and that was my feedback for those points. I want to make sure we're not losing something, because we do have both disproportionalities and disparities, but they've got to be recognized as different things.
So kind of what I'm hearing is that the things that are in this document that talk about historical work that the task force has accomplished and is fine. But what we want to do is beef up the what we feel the going forward work is. Is that fair that we would just add some of these items like public defender's office resources, prosecutor's office resources, competency restoration work, which I agree, Caleb, that's getting a lot of attention in a lot of circles. So we should probably at least mention it. So Stephen and Jill and I and Jack are going to meet with Pyramid at what, 2:15 today. Is this a good opportunity for us to provide this feedback? I would think, right, Jill?
Yes, I think it's necessary that we do that. Absolutely.
Stephen?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was a good summary of what we've discussed now, Barry. I guess I have two additional thoughts. One is, it seems, and I guess we can gauge this by this afternoon's planning discussion. If possible, I think it would be valuable to have Emily and Sakara available at the January 23rd task force meeting. I don't know what you think, Barry.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess my bigger question, listening to this, is a question about how the task force functions most effectively. We have a lot of meetings. We have a lot of people who can't make meetings. We have challenges scheduling meetings when there are large groups of attendees. People actually, unlike me, have a day job that they are responsible for. So we've been tending to fall into smaller groups doing a lot of the real work of the task force. And yet it comes back to the task force that hasn't done that work, but needs to have some ownership of it. And so what we have going on this morning is a small group thought we were pretty much on the right track. And when the discussion opens up, we have very different viewpoints, and maybe not some consensus around the work. So I'm just raising a question as co-chair, how we think we can best go about doing the work. I mean, a lot of time has gone into this with Emily and Sakara, but it's only been a few people. And so how do we get a communications plan like we're moving toward, and the work that entails, but still have the ability to have buy-in by everybody? I'm throwing that out in a general way. I don't necessarily think we have time to be discussing that today, but it's a question I have as co-chair for how really to sort of shepherd our work as a large group, as a diverse group.
Yeah.
Well,
Maya?
I'll chime in, Stephen, and just say, I think that statement in and of itself is really helpful to hear. And that if you have these two individuals come to the meeting to make and present this work, to explain the process by which it happened. And exactly what you said, that like, this has been the focused work of a small group of people. And I mean, if we expect to get buy-in from the whole group, you have to expect there's going to be some change, and there's going to be some identification of more work to be done. So I think that's just a fact. But the way you phrased it, I think would be a really good way to begin introducing it to the group.
Yeah, and I think it's critical that they attend, Stephen, that Sakara and Emily attend, because I think they might be able to help guide this process a little bit as well, because that's what they do, as far as when we talk to the task force.
And I'll just say, to follow up, if I may jump in, Perry. That's why, as Jill noted, we had Emily and Sakara presenting this stuff, sort of walking through a couple stages of it to the whole task force, to try to familiarize people. But there's a lot that passes across our screen over a period of months, so it's hard to have a handle on that, and maybe the direction or the import of what was being shared earlier didn't quite register entirely. Anyway, it's a process thing I'm wrestling with at the moment, I guess.
Maya? Harry?
I think, to your point, Stephen, even as we were looking at this as a group, I was in a meeting before, I think others may have been as well, but pulling this up and starting to read through, the however many there are core message, the 18 core messages. One of the things that I realized and others pointed out, that it's like, oh, okay, so the core messages that are informing the presentation would have actually been a kind of a helpful piece. Again, we discovered that as we were talking through this, but I think it's somewhat representative of what you're talking about, Stephen. That a lot of work gets done by a smaller group, and then, of course, as we move into larger groups, we're going to see a variety of perceptions and that. And I do agree that I think that it would be helpful to the larger task force to lay that out, and I think also a bit of discussion about the fact that this is the nature of how this work is being done. It's small groups that are very focused on it and are spending a lot of time, and then bringing it to the larger group. So please understand, that piece. So I think bringing that context is going to be a really important aspect of this particular project. And of course, it's not limited to this project. It's true across the board. So I offer that.
Anybody have anything else on this?
I'm just thinking that we're trying to do a perfect job, and we can't, in the sense that we're going to slip in certain areas. We're going to overlook an important topic, perhaps. And we're just trying extremely hard not to overlook anything, because this is our big chance to make a hugest impact on our county and the future of the health of our county. I mean, I can't think of anything for myself any bigger to me personally than what we're working on. And this is just one formative piece. And so we'll probably make an error or two, but we're trying really hard not to do that. Yeah. And so the feedback is not a criticism, I think, from our group, but just let's not overlook this. Let's not overlook that. Let's make sure that we do it as well as we possibly can.
Chief Tech, did you have another comment?
Well, only to say thank you. And I have to leave this meeting to drive to another meeting. So as you know, people are starting to meet more often in person. So,
Yep.
So, all right. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Have a good weekend. Okay. Jill, do you think you have enough to bring to our meeting at 2:15? Okay, we will keep you in the loop, obviously, and we'll look forward to a really robust discussion at the task force meeting. So our next item is responses to emails from citizens. This is Jill and Stephen.
So the first one, we received an email. I received an email from Dr. Kinlan with DSHS. He wants to present some information on phase 3 implementation plan related to True Blood. And I'm just wondering what committee, who wants that in their committee?
That's legal.
I think it needs to be both behavioral health and legal joint, because it affects both.
Okay. So I'll invite him to the March joint meeting. Excellent, thank you.
The only other way to look at this is that Barry's and Perry's work group on competency restoration, that's what we're talking about. And that's now expanding a little bit, at least on an occasional basis, to include the legislative wish list group out of the behavioral health subcommittee. And here again, you get an example of paring down to a smaller work group of people doing a lot of heavy lifting on stuff. But that would be another place where Dr. Kinlan could inform the discussions Barry has triggered.
I can forward this email to you, Stephen, and then you're free to distribute however you see fit to those folks. Does that sound all right?
Well, let me just get some feedback from Barry, particularly, and Perry as well on the work group part of things.
Well, Perry, do you think we should put that on our list for the agenda items?
I think it'd be great, honestly. We have a number of different things I was going to touch base with you, Barry, that are considerations for the agenda. We have a meeting on the 18th, so that's going to be pretty close. But
yeah,
I think it'd be really valuable for our, I'll just say, February meeting. I know we're trying to find different times and so forth, but for our meeting following the 18th, only because the 18th is so close that we likely couldn't, make arrangements. But I would find it helpful, particularly relative to, and it happens to be one of the agenda items, Kevin Bovenkamp's letter out of DSHS, and, in making statements that are true as far as the plan is concerned, but the actual implementation of the plan in the different phases didn't really go the way the plan originally was made. And so, again, some of the statements that are coming out that OCRP, outpatient competency restoration, is occurring in 11 counties, that's not accurate from what I can find. It's certainly happening in some locations, but as one example. So I think it'd be super helpful to have it there, unless we wanted to, have it at the combined behavioral health and legal and justice, and others get invited in. Those are our two options in the way that I see it.
Stephen.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking along the lines Perry suggested, the joint meeting, and invite your work group members, or with a big arm twist in the invitation. The problem with that is, as I think about that, is the joint meeting is until March, and there's a lot of discussion. There's a legislative session going on where there could be some steps encouraged. So I don't know if that's too long. I don't know.
Well, I think, Perry, the group, we're going to at least talk about this issue, I'm sure, at our next meeting. Preview the finding, the decision that's come out. We can take a look at that and think of how we want to have somebody come in. Jill?
Yeah, there's nothing stopping Dr. Kinlan from going to both groups.
Right.
We can plan on a formal discussion and presentation at the March joint meeting, but you guys have his contact information now. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from reaching out to him and saying, we'd love to hear more about this at our meeting, specifically on this issue with our smaller work group. You guys are absolutely welcome to do that.
And in fact, that makes some sense, because there would be a level of detail to the questions, and Perry identified just one point.
Yeah.
that the people who already have been working on this for a while could ask, that would be very different from the level of queries that might come from even the joint committee meeting.
Okay, Perry and I will talk and we'll figure out at what level we'll put, detail, we'll put that on our next meeting. Maya?
Thanks. Two questions, one question, I guess, for Stephen. Are you I saw the announcement about what phase 3 and what counties were going to be affected, and Whatcom was not listed. Are you suggesting that that's not fixed and that there's a timeliness issue because maybe there can be advocacy or something? Is that what you're saying?
I was not suggesting it wasn't fixed. I think in DSHS's plan, it is fixed. And I think the legislative wish list, and I'm glad Mike joined just now. The legislative wish list was looking for an end run around the DSHS plan where we might have authority outside the true blood settlement terms, which is the plan, to institute something locally. And I think that's the Bovenkamp memo, which sets out what that would entail, and you'd be on your own for funding and stuff. So.
Okay, and then just to touch lightly on the competency work group, if you intend to have a February meeting, I think these need to get scheduled more in advance. I worry it's already mid-January. If this is going to be a consistent and ongoing, I think it needs to get scheduled, because I know my February already looks pretty.
Yeah, we're going to work on that. I think we'll set up a certain day each month, and that we'll have a meeting. Perry and I will work on that. I agree, Maya.
Maya, did my comment respond to everything you were asking me?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Was there anything else, Jill, on correspondence?
Stephen, you wanted to discuss the email from Cliff Langley?
Oh, yeah, let me wrap up the Dr. Kinlan point.
Sure.
Mike, I don't know if you caught all of that or where we're headed with that. And I just wanted to invite your input on that, since you've been involved in a side set of discussions on this.
Right. Yeah, I got most of it. I've been guilty of trying to do 2 meetings. I had to let the other one go. And so I was listening to part of it. I didn't catch all of it, Stephen, but I am going to have another conversation with you probably tomorrow, so I can always get a little caught up. I think in general, I'm pretty square with what's happening. I would like to try to attend that, because I think it's just really salient to the behavioral subcommittee. So just going forward, expressing that interest that I did when we met before.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think if you were going further, I don't know if you have already, Stephen, discussed the other wish list items and what might happen with that particular one, if you've already hit that.
We have not.
I'll wait then.
Okay. So the other comment that Jill received was from Cliff Langley, who's a member of the SAC, a former sheriff's deputy, who was asking the task force to make sure that the schools explicitly taught and some provision of state law, which I read at one point, but the substance of which has left my mind. It was not relevant to me to preventing or reducing incarceration. It was outside the scope of the task force's work. I don't know if people saw that, whether they agree with my reaction to it, and second question is whether it warrants any response other than Jill just saying, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Stephen, if I recall, I think the substance was all around be patriotic, mind your parents, go to school on time, and don't do drugs, basically.
Something like that, yeah.
To that effect, yeah. Jill?
Just to let everyone know, when the task force does receive an email from a member of the public, my role simply is to forward it on to the task force members, and then you are all able to respond individually to whoever sends an email as you like. I don't typically send responses. I never have. If that's something that you want me to start doing, if that's something we need to start scheduling on steering committee meetings, that's something we'll have to talk about in the grander scheme of things. Yeah.
I was not suggesting that, Jill. That could be a black hole for you, and I don't want to add to your workload. You do plenty for us.
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing is that we heard it. And that's our responsibility, is to hear the feedback and to hear what some people are thinking, or various people are thinking. And that to me is sufficient. We either incorporate it or don't.
Maybe just an email, thank you for your input would be
Okay.
sufficient, right? At this point.
And who would you like to send that email?
I would send it, but
I
Who are
did
you
come
pointing?
from I know with Stephen, I don't want to suggest the co-chairs of the task force, but I'm wondering if that might make the most sense. Thank you for your
That's what I was
comments and
gonna say.
participation. Here's our next meeting.
Yeah, I'll be glad to send something.
anything else?
I just didn't want to make it up as on my own as I went along.
Maybe something co-authored by you and Jack would be appropriate, or at least co-signatory.
Sure, I'll run it by Jack.
I just want to really quick, Jill brought up a point, and I think, you know, the amount of correspondence that I've been exposed to on steering since joining is pretty small, but I got a funny feeling that could change. And just realizing that as we become more present in people's minds, we're going to get more feedback. I think Jill's got a point that we might want to just have something so that we have a process to deal with these. And then we can be nimble and responsive, even if that's a pat email response. Thank you for your interest in the task force. And, but, you know, even though we haven't seen it much, I wonder if we're going to see more. And Jill, that wouldn't be hard. You just put on something that, like, if there's correspondence, it's the last thing before go to the order, and we just look at it, right?
Yeah, that wouldn't be hard at all. We can definitely develop an auto reply to folks who send an email, if that's something you want to do as well. But thank you for bringing that up, Mike. If Pyramid is successful, and if we're successful with this communications effort, we should absolutely hope we're getting more emails and more attendance at the meeting. So thank you for bringing that up.
And some of it might be more applicable. And this is not to slam the particular piece of correspondence that you have in front of you, but some of it really could, you know, we might want to invite that person, or, you know, might want to recruit them as a member, or, you know, it might need a more reasoned response. So this group seems to be the best spot to figure that out.
I agree. We ought to give this some thought for those future possibilities. I would like that to be a more deliberative kind of decision. I'll say personally, one of the things that puts me off most is an auto reply. Thank you. We received your viewpoint, and we'll consider it. You know, I mean, that's like a middle finger, and that's what people already think they get on this kind of public policy discussion. So I'd like to talk through that a little bit more before we decide what we're going to do.
Raylene.
I don't know if it's a middle finger. I don't know if I necessarily agree. And I see it from a different take. People send us hearing requests via email on a regular basis, and they want to know that we got them. So a response that says this has been passed on to the task force, and you may be getting a further response from a specific member, you may be invited. I mean, I think maybe the wording on an automatic reply, or feel free to come and participate at the end of every meeting with a list of the meetings. So, but I think further discussion is necessary, but I don't think we want to necessarily get rid of an auto reply, especially if Pyramid is successful in their communications, because we don't need Jill to be overwhelmed with that and having a specific mailbox that has those auto replies. I think people want to know that when they take the time to send something to the task force, we need to let them know that they've been heard. And if we don't respond at all, or we overwhelm with one individual's response time, I don't think that's fair either. So I think it's important that we all participate and then maybe look at how an auto response may be beneficial, and those could be assigned to specific committees when there's an email that comes through to respond to, because not everybody can respond to each email. Sometimes there's legal ramifications for some of us to respond properly.
Just to be clear, Raylene, that's a perfect first step of the kind of deliberation I was encouraging. I wasn't trying to oppose any auto reply of any sort. I do think that has feasibility benefits and the wording is important. That's just the discussion I wanted to start.
Perry?
Maybe this is where Raylene was actually going. And I, one of the things in my work that I really enjoy is I return that phone call to that individual, really personalize that interaction as a county staff, seek, and I have the opportunity obviously to do that or pass that on. Auto reply makes a lot of sense to me, immediately responding to an email that's sent. But then, and maybe we were talking about this, I was thinking, Stephen, when you were talking, a sort of a template framework of a response from an individual that is a little more personalized, back kind of, component. So I don't think there's anything wrong with an auto response saying, thanks for taking the time, we'll take a look at this. And then somehow a more personalized response that could be templated is sort of my point, to make sure that we're staying within the bounds. But oftentimes I get feedback from people of, wow, you called me back, you gave me this information, this is great, kind of experience. And it feels really good to be able to provide that resource to, community members. So I offer that perspective.
I think this is something that we'll have to bring up in greater detail. I agree with Stephen. It needs to be thoroughly discussed. I could think of several ways auto reply could work, but anything else on correspondence? And maybe that's something, Jill, we should put on our next agenda.
We can put it on the February agenda. Sure.
Yeah, because we don't have time today, I think, to lay out a whole approach on how we would figure out how to do this, but
Yeah, and I don't really think it's even going to come up as an issue again for the next few months. So if it holds over to March as well, I think that's plenty of time.
Anything else? All right, let's move to composition and role of the steering committee. And Stephen, got you down for this one.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. I'll give Jill my thanks for that.
Yeah,
I think Mike was the one who raised this question, and I would just let Mike kick it off with his thoughts about this. And I guess I chimed in support of the conversation.
Mike?
Thank you. I'm happy to frame it and tee it up, and then I really want to invite, obviously thoughts. So my comments stem from kind of looking at the composition of folks in the room and kind of an acknowledgement of how the steering committee has changed, even in the brief period of time that I've joined you all. Obviously, you guys were going concern before I joined. And one of the things that I've realized is that it is, as Jack and Stephen did a really nice job kind of laying out the history of the steering committee and how it's really changed from an agenda setting, a group that could like brainstorm and talk about an agenda. And it really looks a little bit more like some policy. So I think, important things get discussed here. So that was an important part in my observation and why I brought it to you all. The second piece of that is, as the task force really looks at communicating with the public and transparency, it's going to be really important that decision-making bodies reflect some of those changes, some of the thinking, and as we realize the importance in what steering does for the whole task force, that we look a little bit at representation. And so the obvious formula of having your co-chairs, of the whole task force, obvious makes sense, and your subcommittees. But I started looking at, our composition, most of, what I see, right, and what I don't see. So there's obviously strategic representation where we go to specific populations because we think that'll be valuable. So I don't mean to be so scattered, but I think where the agenda gets set, there's power. And I think as the task force increasingly invites in the community and takes our message out to the community, we're going to be we need to be more reflective of that community. I don't have a particular exact idea, other than I've seen some other health department committees try to tackle this issue. And maybe even the SAC, and maybe those of you on the SAC might have some thoughts about increasing representation. But just a couple of other thoughts. We could create seats, which is a way to do that. It obviously is a way of sharing power. It's a way of inviting in. And that would be a much more intentional way of kind of augmenting the number of steering. And we could look at whether that be racial or ethnic groups, whether folks with lived experience, families or households with criminal justice involvement. I think that list could be talked about. But I think what I wanted to bring today is just frame what I see as an opportunity for us to be more reflective of the community and acknowledging steering's role, while also keeping it to be not the whole task force, right? Because you don't want a situation where you become so big, you're no longer nimble. And I humbly realize that I'm proposing something, but also we want to keep it curtailed. So with that, I would stop. I also think there's ties in it to racial equity. So the reason why I bring it up, and where I come from is I think when you look at it from the racial equity lens, you really want all phases of your work to be more as representative as it can be. And you don't have to fix everything in a day, but I think movement towards it, inclusion would be very valuable. And I specifically also brought up a point too, that some of the really key areas that we deal with, need representation. So law enforcement, for example, Caleb is usually like our only, person on here. That is such a huge part of the collaboration work that happens on the task force. And is it fair to have that only sit on one person's shoulders? Might it be beneficial? I also think about folks in our defense, right? In peace and court. So those are just categories that we could talk about, but that can be a way to do it, is to intentionally expand based on creation of some categories. And with that, I would stop. And those are some of my framing thoughts.
Maya.
Thanks. I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mike. And I'll say, I just asked Jill to put me on and give me the schedule, and I added myself to this meeting. I don't know, I didn't get invited. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be here. I don't really know. So you all can tell me, or if there's a process you should go through, but so do tell me that, please. But on the note of trying to increase some diversity, I mean, do we have any budget? Can we pay people for their time? Because I think if we're going to be asking some populations to participate, either at this level or at other levels, that just seems like something we should be offering for folks that maybe don't have a full-time job or it would really impact their income to take time out in the middle of the day. They would have to miss work to participate, that kind of thing. Whereas I get to do this as my work. So I get paid to be here, a lot of us do. So thank you.
Arlene.
Yes, thank you for bringing this issue up, and I hadn't thought about it, and I do want to think about it because it really matters to me. This is so much about power. I mean, when I thought to myself, how is it going to be possible to make these changes? I knew immediately that you have to get to the hearts of power. And here we are, okay? And more people need to be here, because the people affected by the decision that we make and who have the experiences of their lives struggling and falling into holes and cracks and cycling their families' struggles over and over again. They are experts. And we need the expert's voice, whether it to be about an ethnic or a racial representation or the experiential representation. Either one is important. I don't want to see the committee get too large and unwieldy for discussion purposes, because I like the flow of the discussion that happens here. It looks really good to me. So there has to be, a limit on it, but thank you. I think this is important.
Stephen,
I'll just reiterate that I appreciated Mike raising this point when he did. I mean, from my organizational experience, we were a steering committee when we largely set agendas. We're really functioning now as an executive committee, what I think as an executive committee where we're vetting subjects, we're giving priorities, we're fleshing out issues, we're making pretty substantive recommendations to the task force. So there's a lot of substantive work that goes on in the steering committee. And I think that's a good point to reflect on who we are and how we operate. Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware that there's like a committee charge for the steering committee. If there is, I think we ought to redo that so that there's some formality to how we are composed and what we are authorized to do and how we do it. I also, like Arlene just said, fear the growth and the size. And I'll just say, for reasons of not wanting to burden individuals and to be able to recruit people as committee chairs, we've had co-chairs on 2 of the committees. And that's automatically slid into the steering committee, but I don't know that that needs to be the case. Co-chairs divide up responsibilities. That's why we have co-chairs. One of them could take the responsibility of serving on the steering committee. Also, that would take care of, I think it's the disproportionality that Caleb suffers under by being only a single chair of index. So there are a lot of things to rethink to make us more efficient, more effective. And I think the diversity question and the outside perspectives, I mean, this is sort of an in group in a lot of ways of the task force. So Maya, thank you for joining and having an interest in joining. Chief Tank, the same when he's able to drop in. I just think all of the points that have been made are worth consideration.
Caleb.
Sorry, this is going to be a little bit of thought popcorn. So as we're talking, I just had a couple of things come up in my brain, and I just wanted to know if any of it resonated with you all. As Maya points out, a lot of folks have either, employment outside of this endeavor and or are being paid to do something completely different. But it begs the question then, should I be looking to some of our staff to, come to the table? If it helps to, check the box of having somebody who's involved, lived experience, and is being paid to be here, that could help. So we have staff members who could certainly help with the diversity question on this particular panel. But then that goes back to the question of charge. How big is too big? What are we supposed to actually be doing here? So I'm just saying, I'm putting it out there that we have opportunities, and I certainly have staff that I can make available to this committee for that purpose.
Mike?
just want to second real quickly Lisa's point about remuneration for folks with lived experience. And that's part of what makes it more honoring and helps us avoid tokenism, which is really, really crucial. And I want to make sure that my remarks are framed properly, right? Representation is not tokenism, and we want to be really authentic and respectful so that people know the difference.
Yeah.
And the other piece to what Lisa said, I like the example. I didn't look at all of them, but the health department, for one of its task forces, I think it was a child family task force, had a really good document about, just explaining why there was money available, how it was available, really transparent. And so if this group decided to do that and used some of our, I believe we do have a small budget, Barry and Jill, that I think was unused in years past. But if we didn't, it wouldn't be a large ask. We could use that if folks wanted to, and maybe at a subsequent meeting where we might talk about, well, how would it grow? What other purposes? And what would it look like? We might be able to use that as a starting point, that health department document about that.
Raylene?
There it is. I've been extremely busy in the last couple months with other things, which is kind of one of the reasons the last Legal and Justice Committee didn't happen. But I don't want it not to happen. And I know that we all have different tasks. And, maybe it's worth looking at rotating co-chairs periodically. If that's something that other people would want to step up and do. I want to participate. I want to continue to participate, but sometimes it's a struggle. I mean, I only have 2 people that work in my court outside that are actually in here. And when one of them's gone, I find myself going 6 different directions. But I want to make sure that I'm adequately providing good feedback and taking the time to research everything. That's not always possible, whether it's because I'm working a full-time job and going to school, or it's because somebody else that's volunteering has other places to go. So is that something we bring up to each committee and say, is somebody else want to step up and be the chair, and then maybe rotate every year? But I also think it's important to have people from the committee join in. I really appreciated Maya being here. I appreciate Tank's input. And I think it's beneficial because I frankly don't always have the time that I think is warranted to these conversations. So.
Thanks, Raylene. Anything else? So Jill, I wonder if we could start drafting kind of a for lack of any other words, mission statement, but not a mission statement, a description of what steering does, and maybe we could start from there. Or is that something we already have?
I don't know if we have something like that. Steering was created before my time. I think drafting parameters is a great idea. The other committees have those. I don't know quite where to start. I can do a little bit of research to see if what the discussions were back in the day about what the original intent of steering was, but I don't know that I'm the person to create a first draft of that. I can certainly provide support for someone, but we can figure that out.
Jack was here since the beginning, for sure, and he might have some insight, and I would be willing to work with you maybe on the forward thinking stuff. And I want to get that, that list of ideas out of Mike's brain that he had.
I'm happy to provide input, Barry, if that's useful, either like in a meeting or like looking at a document. I'm happy to do that, and it'll probably be more cogent if I write it, actually.
And if you guys just want to throw some things at me in an email, I can gather everything up and organize it a little bit. That would be very helpful as well.
Anything else on that? Good discussion. Okay, next is state legislative priorities, and it says tentative. Stephen, do you have anything for us today?
Well, again, I'll rope Mike into participating in this. As I think you all know and have seen a draft, this came out of an invitation from Representative Alicia Rule to give her a wish list of agenda item of task force desires for the legislative session that she could help promote. And subsequently, Senator Shoemake expressed similar interest. This came out of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee, a subgroup of that, which Mike and I were a part. Perry's been an advisor on the side, as he is on most things behavioral health. Courtney Taylor from Maya's office, Jackie Mitchell when she was still in county employ, and Brian Estes from the Behavioral Health Committee and the NAMI Watcom board were the participants in that. We had conversations with Representative Rule and Senator Shoemake. They asked for some additional information. You've seen the 4 points. They involved operational funding for the Crisis Stabilization Center, expanding prescriptive authority for detainees in jail to get psychotropic medications, for which there were unconscionable delays under the existing contracting ability. The targeting of increased reimbursement to on-the-ground direct service behavioral health providers and supervisors, so that we could actually expand community capacity for diversion and treatment. And then this last point about competency restoration, trying to do a side run around the True Blood settlement and the limitations that the DSHS plan has on that, and see if we could get both legal authority and legislative funding to support a localized effort for those services. That work group that developed the wish list and talked to our legislators is meeting again tomorrow, as Mike referenced. We're inclined now to sort of pull the competency restoration item off the list, only to include it in Barry's work group conversations, which we'll start attending, I guess, next week, and see what we can do. And that doesn't mean we might not involve some legislative advocacy, but it means we're not quite ready. We don't have all the information in place, or we don't really have a what in place to ask for. There's some information on cost that we're trying to get on some of the other factors. And I guess that's a status report. We're working on these. We're trying to loop back to Representative Rule and Senator Shoemake to respond to some of their questions. Perry has been very helpful in providing some initial sort of thumbnail cost estimates of certain aspects of things. Not surprisingly, we found that almost every one of these issues is far more complicated than it appeared to us at first. And so there's some backfilling and further discussion that we need. And that's part of what we'll be taking up tomorrow when we meet. Mike, I'm sure I left a lot out and a lot of nuances. You want to add to that?
I think it actually was a really good coverage. I think the thing that I was thinking in my head that I wanted folks to know and wanted to be like on the record as well is that just an acknowledgement that some of the things that we face are structural and not always in the county. And they are not always with our staff or with our providers or with, the folks committing criminal acts. Some of the things that we need changed are outside of here. And the task force was running into challenges after some of the law changes made it very difficult for our law enforcement partners to do their job. And we started talking to legislators. And I think that for me kind of kicks it off. And I think this shouldn't be a one-off year. I think the task force is going to be a spot where things get lifted up that we're going to need some either funding for, which I think is what people usually think of in terms of advocacy, but sometimes we're going to need some policy or rule changes and that feedback and connection. So one of my hopes is, obviously this year is kind of went off and was more spontaneous, but one of the things that became so clear to us is alignment. So we really wanted to align with city and county, policy planks or advocacy planks, whether that be the Association of Counties or what it is. So that was really important. And two, to be really planful about that, because what we found out, as Stephen mentioned, is it's quite a bit deeper as it goes in. It's enough to know the issue, but you got to get really deep into it. So even though we had definitely now have a follow-up meeting with our legislators to get to do some of our homework, I think the conversation over the years can be a powerful tool for the task force, especially when we run into those things that we just can't solve on our own. And it's not because there isn't interest or time or people showing up or caring. It really is because we need some help from Olympia. So I just wanted to express deep gratitude to Stephen, who's put an amazing amount of time, Perry, who's been doing tons of research, Arlene, everybody else has been a part of that. Because I really think it is kind of a new direction and one that's quite promising for the task force.
I'll just piggyback again on Mike's comment. We've asked Barry to start some conversations with the executive's office so that we can align those legislative agendas and get the leverage and credibility of being in sync with bigger asks. We've tried to frame this wish list in a way that deals with issues that other jurisdictions, not just Whatcom County, are facing, knowing that one vote in the House or one vote in the Senate does not pass something. You've got to build a coalition of supporters to get a majority. And I think we've done that pretty well. And I'll also say that I think we are about as well positioned as any place I can think of other than King County, because it's the 800-pound gorilla. But we're out ahead on a lot of these issues of most counties. We have just a really, really top-notch legislative contingent. And what I found interesting in our conversations with those two representatives is it really covers the scope. We had Representative Rule, who is a mental health practitioner herself, very interested in some of the policy and systems kind of issues she could fiddle with. And we had Senator Shoemake, who just says, how much money do you need? I'll plug it in. So we're coming at it from both directions, and we've got really effective legislators working on our behalf, both of whom know about the task force work, respect the task force work, and see how much more needs to be done and are willing to take part in that. So I agree with Mike that this move into a relatively small but relatively critical advocacy role for the task force is well timed and really important and holds some promise.
I have to turn the meeting over to Stephen. I'm sorry, I have a hard stop. I have to get to another meeting right now. I think we just finished this agenda item, then we just have the agenda for the task force meeting and public comment left. So I apologize. I just got appointed to the behavioral health, North Sound Behavioral Health Executive Committee, and I just found out their meeting is today. So I gotta go. I'm sorry, and we'll see you next time.
Go get them, Barry. Okay, is there more discussion on the legislative wish list? Feedback, suggestions? Okay, we'll keep the steering committee and the task force and the behavioral health subcommittee and the joint behavioral health legal and justice systems subcommittee updated as things move forward on that. Jill, what's next on the agenda? I don't have it up in front of me.
The items for the task force agenda. So right now I have the SAC needs assessment, final motion, and the pyramid. And I think those are two pretty big topics. Is there anything else that needs to be on the agenda for January?
Jill, this doesn't need to necessarily be on in January, but I thought I would circle back around as Marty Solomon had done the presentation and information and relative to the sequential intercept model and the updating and so forth. We touched base, if I recall correctly, in the last steering committee meeting relative to the sequential intercept model addendum. And the recommendation, suggestion from both Marty and I was that the addendum has been assumed by the sequential intercept model itself, as well as it's been located in other places and should no longer be sort of an official component. But I may have not been tracking. You had sort of given a little bit of feedback. And again, I don't think this needs to be on our next, meeting, but I wanted to just bring it up just as a cleanup, organizational piece.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Perry. That question has been discussed in the SAC planning team. And Stephen, I'm not recalling what the decision was on that. Maybe you recall. If not, then Perry, we'll have to figure out what we decided and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, we're meeting this afternoon. I don't recall off the top of my head, Jill, I'm sorry. Jill, the other thing I would put on there is reflective of the fact that there's been a flurry of discussion in the pretrial processes work group about pretrial services and about the implementation of the public safety assessment, a couple of other questions. Again, sort of subgroup meetings that have involved Judge Garrett, Judge Freeman, Dave Reynolds, Superior Court Administrator, and myself. And I think it would be useful for the task force to get an update from that group. So I would ask you if you could communicate with Judge Garrett and Judge Freeman and ask them if they could report on the conversations and what's going on in future planning there for both risk assessment and pretrial services. And make sure one of them can come.
I can invite them. I can't make sure they'll come.
No, I know, but I mean, understand whether they say they can or whether we need to look for a different way to approach that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can we go back to Perry's point really quick? Because I'm not sure we cleaned it up. And I was present, Perry, when maybe it was a presentation that you were talking about with Marty. And I think, really to clean that up, that if I'm understanding Perry correctly, the task force adopted the updated SIM from the BEGAT group that at that time attained this addendum. And I think what we've got now from Perry is an opportunity to clean that up and tidy that up and embrace the more updated one, because Perry, if I understood you and Marty correctly, those things are really now incorporated in the SIM. We no longer need it. But doesn't that need a vote to adopt the new one since we adopted the old one formally? And if so, could we throw that on the agenda and get that thing done? I just want to ask that of Jill and Stephen and see what y'all think about that.
Jill?
I would, yes. And Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's kind of where they left off, was having the task force adopt the updated one, which is fine. The question is, does it need to happen in January? Just because we have so many other things on that are time sensitive, the SAC needs assessment, pyramid, and we might think something like that is a slam dunk, but it might not necessarily be. So is there a time sensitive reason for having the IPRTF adopt it in January as opposed to maybe February, March, where we might have a little more room on the agenda? And Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of where I think we left it. I could be wrong.
There were several threads in that conversation. That was one of them. The other was that in endorsing the SAC recommendations. They include the updated SIM with the incorporation of the addendum. So that's a de facto approval or adoption, and you get into the nuance of those different words. So I don't think we really resolved the question of what we should do in the January task force meeting. And we do have a planning team, a SAC planning team meeting this afternoon. I guess we should clarify that finally, but those were the sort of the directions, the rabbit holes we went down in the planning group discussion about the updated SIM. And so if anybody else has some thoughts about what the task force ought to do with that in January, that's the specific question before us right now. I'd love to hear them.
So I don't think that it's necessary to do this in January. I just didn't want to lose this particular piece of it. I have what I believe is the most recent copy, which was August 8th, 22 of the sequential intercept model addendum. Now, again, these are the pieces that were off to the side that really were about more process improvements than they were services, which is what the SIM is oriented towards. So I'll send that to Marty. I think that she has it, so she could, you guys could have that discussion. I just wanted to make sure that it was clean because this originated from the behavioral health gap analysis team. And, I'm sort of trying to wrap that process up and move on. And I just didn't want anybody to, identify it and say, wow, we never addressed that. So I don't think January is necessary. I think later is fine. I'll provide this information and then whatever decisions are made, I think, because I agree with Jill. As people look at it, they may very much agree. Oh, we do need to do that. And it's like, I agree. It just isn't a part of the sequential intercept model. That's all I'm actually after is many of the actions I would fully agree with that were recommended. And that's why we actually put them on the addendum. But to your point, Stephen, many of them have also been picked up in an array of the various groups and supports that are in existence. It's already occurring. Many of them is like, yep, that's happening right now. So I believe the document is not necessary. So.
Okay, more to come on that. So I think that was the last agenda item, was it not, Jill? I mean, the last substantive agenda. So is there any other business? Oh, I'm sorry, Jill, you were going to say something.
Go ahead, you're fine.
Any other business? Okay, is there any public comment?
Looks like we have one attendee in the meeting today. If you would like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand now. And no hands are raised, and I don't see anyone in the conference room attending in person.
Okay, then we'll adjourn the January meeting of the steering committee and look forward to seeing you all whenever we get together again. Task force meeting on the 23rd.